The moment the cash touched my hand, my stomach dropped. Not dramatically, not like in the movies where everything freezes and music swells. It was quieter than that. A subtle physical sinking, like when an elevator starts to fall before your mind has time to panic. Daniel had just stood up from the table. 2 minutes, he said. His phone had buzzed and he smiled apologetically, brushing my fingers as he rose. Warm, familiar, reassuring. I'll be right back, he whispered, already halfway gone. I watched his back disappear into the soft blur of the restaurant-tailored jacket, confident stride, a man who belonged everywhere he stood. I remember thinking absurdly how safe I felt sitting there as his wife. Then the hand appeared, old, thin, pale. It slid across the white tablecloth and pressed something heavy into my palm. I looked down before I looked up. Instinct, money, a thick stack of it. Real bills. Folded tightly, wrapped in a rubber band stretched thin with use. For a split second, my brain rejected the image. This didn't belong in my evening. Not here, not now. I lifted my eyes. The woman sat at the table beside mine. Elderly, slight, gray hair pulled back too tightly, as if order were the only thing keeping her upright. I had seen her before, I was sure of it, but the recognition hovered just out of reach. She leaned toward me close enough that her shoulder brushed mine. And that's when I smelled it. Not perfume, not food, fear, sharp, metallic, almost sour. Listen to me, she whispered. Her voice trembled, but her grip tightened around my fingers with surprising strength. Run. The word landed between us like a dropped glass. Run, she repeated. My daughter married him. She didn't survive. I stared at her. For a heartbeat, I truly thought she had mistaken me for someone else. Another woman, another table, another life. I almost smiled. Almost laughed. There was a part of me, a rational, well-trained adult part, that wanted to gently slide the money back, apologize, and return to my champagne before Daniel came back. This was madness. Old age confusion. A tragic misunderstanding. But her hand wouldn't let go. Her fingers were shaking. Not dramatically. Not enough to draw attention. Just enough that I could feel it. Please, she breathed. Don't argue. Don't ask questions. Bathroom. Window. Call a cab. Now. My heart began to beat faster, though I hadn't decided to believe her. I looked down at the money again. It was heavy. Real things have weight. Lies don't. I think you have the wrong I started. She shook her head sharply. The movement cost her something. I could see it in the way her shoulders stiffened. I'm not wrong, she said. I was wrong once. I won't be again. Her eyes met mine. They weren't wild. They weren't confused. They were exhausted and terrified. Something shifted inside me then, not fear yet, but doubt. A hairline crack in the smooth surface of my evening. I became suddenly aware of sound, the soft clink of cutlery, muted conversation, a piano playing somewhere far away. Everything continued perfectly ordinary, too ordinary. I glanced toward the entrance of the restaurant just to anchor myself, just to remind myself where I was. That's when I saw them. 2 men stood near the door. Big. Bald. Dressed wrong for this place, dark jackets that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. They weren't talking. They weren't checking their phones. They were scanning. Slowly. Methodically. Their eyes moved across tables, paused, moved again. And then stopped. On me. I felt it before I fully understood it, the way prey senses attention before danger becomes visible. My throat tightened. The woman followed my gaze, her breath caught. Do you see them? She whispered. I nodded once. The word husband floated into my mind, fragile, now strangely hollow. Daniel was somewhere beyond that door. Daniel, who brought me coffee in bed. Daniel, who held my hand during quiet moments like this. Daniel, who had chosen this restaurant. "Don't look at them again," she said. "Please." Her hand finally released mine. The sudden absence of contact felt like stepping off a ledge. She stood too quickly, bracing herself against the table. "If you stay," she whispered, her voice barely audible now, "you won't leave." I wanted to stop her, ask her name, ask how she knew Daniel, ask what had really happened to her daughter. Instead, I watched her shuffle toward the exit, her steps uneven but determined, disappearing into the same direction my husband had gone minutes earlier. The money burned against my skin. I sat very still. I told myself to breathe. This was ridiculous. This was paranoia catching. I was a grown woman, educated, calm. I didn't run because a stranger told me to, but my pulse didn't slow. I tried to focus on my body, on the feel of the chair beneath me, the cool glass of champagne untouched at my right hand. My fingers closed around the money. I told myself it meant nothing. And then one of the men by the door tilted his head slightly as if receiving a signal. The other took a step forward. Not rushed, not aggressive, deliberate. Something inside me snapped into clarity. This wasn't about belief anymore. It was about survival. I stood. The chair scraped too loudly against the floor. A nearby diner glanced up, annoyed. I didn't apologize. My purse was open before I consciously decided to open it. The money vanished inside. My hands moved with a speed that felt borrowed, unfamiliar. I didn't look toward the men again. I walked, not ran, toward the corridor leading to the restrooms. Every step felt exposed. Every sound magnified. Behind me, I thought I heard a chair move. A voice murmur, something indistinct. The hallway narrowed. The noise of the restaurant softened as if the world were closing its doors one by one. The women's restroom door swung inward. I slipped inside and locked it. The click of the lock echoed louder than it should have. I leaned back against the door, pressing my palms flat against the wood, trying to breathe quietly. My heart was no longer beating fast. It was pounding. The mirror across from me reflected a woman I didn't recognize, pale eyes too, wide lips parted like she'd forgotten how to speak. "What is happening?" I whispered. The words sounded foreign in the tiled silence. My phone slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the floor. The sound made me flinch. I crouched to pick it up, my knees trembling, and that was when the woman's words came back, not as a warning now, but as a verdict. My daughter married him. She didn't survive. I had married him 2 weeks ago. And somewhere just beyond this door, my husband was walking back toward me, slowly, calmly, like a man who knew exactly where his wife was waiting. And for the first time since I'd said I do, I understood something with terrifying clarity. Whatever I had stepped into it had already begun long before I knew its name. I had trusted Daniel Sterling completely, not blindly, not foolishly. I trusted him the way adults trust, quietly, gradually, through small confirmations that add up over time. The way he never raised his voice, the way he waited until I finished speaking before responding, the way he remembered things I mentioned once and never repeated. His calm voice, his careful words, the way he listened instead of interrupting, that was what convinced me. 2 weeks married, that's all it took. I stood in the women's restroom, my back pressed against the locked door, my breath shallow and uneven. The alarm hadn't gone off yet, but I could hear movement outside now, footsteps in the corridor, a murmur of voices tightening with curiosity. I didn't scream. That surprised me. Somewhere in my mind, I had always assumed that fear would make me loud, dramatic, that panic would demand attention. Instead, it made me quiet. My thoughts slowed, sharpened. Each one arrived fully formed, heavy, undeniable. Daniel doesn't know where I am yet. That was my first clear thought. The second came immediately after. But he will. I pulled my phone from my purse. My hands were steady now, unnaturally so. The shaking had passed, replaced by something colder. I tried to unlock the screen. My thumb slipped. A breath escaped me, too fast, too loud. I froze, listening. Silence, then footsteps again. Closer. I unlocked the phone and opened the ride app, forcing myself not to rush. Rushing made mistakes. Mistakes made noise. The address field blinked. Home? No. The word itself felt dangerous. I typed in the address of my flower shop instead. It wasn't logical, but it was familiar. It was the only place left that felt like mine, searching for nearby drivers. The spinning circle felt obscene in its calm. I glanced up at the mirror again. My eyes didn't look hysterical. They looked alert. As if something in me had already accepted that this night was no longer about romance or misunderstanding, but about escape. The alarm went off as I reached for the sink. A sound so violent it felt physical. It tore through the building, shrill and relentless, bouncing off tile and bone. I gasped, despite myself clapping a hand over my mouth. Chaos followed instantly. Voices, shouts, chairs scraping, the distant thud of running feet. The world outside my door shattered into fragments of sound, and with it came something else, clarity. If there had been doubt before, it burned away in the noise. I didn't wait. I unlocked the door and stepped into the corridor. Smoke hadn't reached this part yet, but panic had. People surged in confused currents, some moving toward exits, others frozen in place, clutching coats and glasses like talismans. I kept my head down. I walked fast, but not fast enough to stand out. I was almost there, almost at the main staircase, when someone stepped directly into my path. The restaurant manager, Victor Sterling. I recognized him instantly, though I had never spoken to him before. He had hovered at our table earlier, smiling too warmly at Daniel, calling him by name, with an intimacy that now made my skin crawl. Now his face was empty. No smile, no confusion, just a flat, assessing look. "I'm afraid you'll have to wait here, ma'am," he said calmly. His body blocked the corridor completely. "I need to leave," I said. My voice sounded wrong to my own ears too, even too controlled. "I understand," he replied. "Just a moment." A moment. That word again. I tried to step around him. He shifted smoothly, effortlessly, keeping himself between me and the stairs. And then I heard Daniel's voice behind him. Not raised, not rushed. Familiar. "It's all right, Victor," Daniel said gently. "My wife isn't feeling well." My stomach twisted. The manager stepped aside without question. Daniel came into view. His jacket was still perfectly fitted, his hair untouched. Not a trace of urgency in his posture, despite the screaming alarm and the growing panic around us. He smiled when he saw me. Not wide, not reassuring. Measured. "There you are," he said softly, as if we were alone. "You scared everyone." I couldn't speak. Something in his eyes stopped me, not cruelty, not anger. Calculation. He stepped closer. "She's been under a lot of stress," he said to the people around us. "Migraines. Sometimes she panics." His hand touched my elbow. Light. Guiding. That was when the word landed. My wife. It didn't sound intimate anymore. It sounded official. Binding. Like a clause in a contract I hadn't read. "No," I said. The word came out small but sharp. Daniel's fingers tightened slightly. "Let's go somewhere quieter," he said, still addressing the room. "She needs air." Victor nodded already, turning to close off the corridor. I understood then, not emotionally but structurally. This wasn't improvisation. This was procedure. I pulled my arm back. Daniel didn't let go. Not forcefully. "Not yet." "Daniel," I said, finally meeting his eyes. "Let go." For a fraction of a second, something flickered across his face. Not surprise. Annoyance. A hairline crack in the composure. "Don't do this," he said quietly. "People are watching." I looked around. They were. Faces turned toward us, curious, sympathetic, uncertain. They saw a man trying to help his distressed wife. They saw a woman flushed and rigid, resisting comfort. They saw what he wanted them to see. The alarm continued to scream. Somewhere glass shattered. I leaned closer to Daniel, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "Who was she?" I asked. His eyes didn't change. "Who?" he replied calmly. "The woman," I said. "The one who spoke to me." A pause, barely perceptible. "Darling," he said gently, "you're confusing things." I felt it then, something deep and visceral. The certainty. He knew exactly who I meant. "I want to leave," I said, louder now. Daniel sighed. Not in frustration. In resignation. He turned to Victor. "Can you give us a moment?" Victor hesitated just long enough to be noticeable, then nodded and stepped back. Daniel leaned in. His mouth was close to my ear. His voice dropped. "You should have stayed at the table," he said. My breath caught. Not because of the words, because of the tone. There was no affection in it, only instruction. "I don't understand," I whispered. "You don't need to," he replied. "You just need to stop." The alarm cut off suddenly. The silence was worse. People froze, unsure what to do next. The interruption broke the spell, and for the first time the crowd began to disperse, some moving toward exits, others standing awkwardly, waiting for direction. Daniel released my arm. "Go outside," he said calmly. "Get some air. I'll take care of this." He gestured toward the doors, toward the men. My heart pounded. This was the moment. I stepped back. "No," I said. Daniel's jaw tightened. "My wife," he said again, louder, this time addressing the room as having an episode. Something snapped inside me. I turned and ran. Not elegantly. Not quietly. I shoved past a couple near the stairs and bolted downward, my heels barely touching the steps. Someone shouted behind me. Someone else cursed. I didn't look back. Cold air hit my face as I burst outside. I didn't stop running until the curb blurred and my lungs burned. When I finally dared to slow, I leaned against a brick wall, gasping, my hands trembling violently now that there was nothing holding them together. My phone vibrated. A message. "Your ride has arrived." I slid into the back seat of the car without looking at the driver. "Please," I said. "Drive." As the car pulled away, I finally allowed myself to think the thought I had been avoiding since the bathroom. The thought that explained everything. The woman wasn't warning me about the future. She was warning me about the present. And the man I had married, the man whose voice I trusted, whose words I believed, had never lost control that night. He had simply revealed it. By the time I reached my flower shop, my hands were numb. Not from the cold, from holding myself together. The cab ride passed in fragments, streetlights bleeding into one another, the driver's voice asking something I didn't hear, my phone vibrating again and again in my lap like a trapped insect. I didn't answer it. I couldn't risk hearing his voice again, not yet. I needed one solid thing in the world that still belonged to me. The shop lights were off when I arrived. That was normal. It was late, but the smell, soil, stems, faint sweetness of old roses hit me the moment I unlocked the door, and for a brief, humiliating second I nearly cried with relief. I locked the door behind me, twice. I leaned my forehead against the glass and breathed. Slowly. Counted the seconds between each breath like I used to during panic attacks years ago, before Daniel, before everything had seemed so stable. "You're safe here," I told myself. I moved to the back room, turned on the small lamp, and sat at my desk. My laptop hummed awake, old and stubborn like it always was. I waited, watched the loading bar inch forward. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I wasn't sure what I was checking for. Messages, maybe. Proof that I hadn't imagined everything. That the restaurant hadn't been a collective hallucination stitched together by fear and coincidence. The screen finally came alive. It took longer than usual to load. That should have warned me. Instead, I watched the spinning circle detached, as if I were observing someone else's life from a distance. Then the message appeared. "Account temporarily frozen, reported suspicious activity, filed by spouse." I stared at the words until they lost meaning. Spouse, lawful husband, Daniel Sterling. The room felt very quiet suddenly. Not empty, just hushed, as if sound itself were waiting to see what I would do. I refreshed the page. The same message. I tried another account. The savings one. The emergency fund my parents had helped me start years ago. Frozen. Flagged. Reported. I felt something inside me collapse, not loudly, not all at once. More like a careful dismantling. One support beam removed, then another. This wasn't a fight. This wasn't a misunderstanding between newlyweds who had moved too fast. This was a plan. I closed the laptop. My reflection stared back at me from the dark screen, eyes dull now, jaw clenched so tightly it ached. I thought of the woman in the restaurant, the certainty in her voice. She didn't survive. I stood up abruptly, chair scraping the floor. "I'm going home," I said aloud to no one. The word home still meant something then. The cab ride there felt longer. Every red light stretched into an accusation. I checked my phone compulsively, half expecting messages from Daniel, apologies, explanations, carefully worded concern. Nothing came. The building loomed ahead, familiar and comforting in its worn predictability. 5 stories, old brick. The maple tree by the entrance whose leaves clogged the gutters every autumn. My parents' building. My building. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time, heart-hammering, not with fear this time, but urgency. The need to be inside behind walls that knew me. The hallway smelled faintly of detergent and old carpet. Mrs. Davis's door across the hall was closed. A sliver of light shone beneath it. I reached apartment 27. My hands shook as I pulled the keys from my bag. The key slid into the lock and stopped. Halfway, as if something solid were blocking it. I frowned, pulled it out, turned it over, tried again. Nothing. I tried the second lock. The same resistance. A cold pressure spread through my chest. "No," I whispered. "No." I knocked, lightly at first, then harder. "Hello," my voice sounded thin, wrong. "Is someone there?" Silence. I knocked again, louder now. Footsteps. Relief surged through me, quick and foolish. The door opened. Not to Daniel, not to a police officer, not to an empty apartment. A woman stood there, mid-50s maybe, wearing a faded bathrobe and slippers. Her hair was twisted into a careless knot. She smelled faintly of cooking oil and something floral cheap. She looked at me with open irritation. "What is it?" she snapped. "Do you know what time it is?" I stared at her. The hallway tilted slightly. I live here," I said. The words felt ridiculous the moment they left my mouth. She laughed, a short, humorless sound. "No, you don't," she replied. "I rent this place." Behind her, I glimpsed my hallway, runner rolled up and shoved against the wall. My coat rack was gone. The photo of my parents that used to hang by the door wasn't there. I couldn't breathe. "This is my apartment," I said again, louder now. My parents' doors began to open around us. Mrs. Davis across the hall cracked her door open. Mr. Nelson from upstairs leaned over the railing. Curious faces appeared one by one, assembling like an audience, and then footsteps sounded on the stairs below, slow, confident. I didn't have to turn around to know. Daniel's voice reached me first. "There you are," he said gently. "We've been looking everywhere for you." I turned. He stood a few steps below me, one hand resting lightly on the railing. Beside him was his mother, Eleanor Sterling. She looked exactly as she always did, composed, immaculate, dressed as if she were attending a board meeting rather than a confrontation in a dim hallway. Her eyes softened when they met mine. "My dear Lydia," she said, stepping forward, "you shouldn't be shouting like this." Her hand closed around my arm. The grip was cold, firm. "This is my apartment," I said, my voice breaking. "Who is she?" Eleanor smiled at the neighbors. "Lydia's been under a lot of stress," she explained calmly. "She's been confused lately." Daniel sighed, the sound heavy with practiced sadness. "She's had some financial trouble," he added. "Debts. We were trying to protect her." "Protect?" The word tasted bitter. Mrs. Davis glanced at me with concern. "You did say you were overwhelmed, dear," she murmured. "Maybe you forgot." "Forgot." Eleanor nodded sympathetically. "It happens," she said, "especially after everything she's been through." I shook my head violently. "I never sold this apartment," I said. "I never signed anything." Daniel reached into his briefcase. The leather creaked softly as he opened it. He removed a folder. Neat, official. He unfolded a document and held it up so everyone could see. "Here," he said gently, "the notarized contract." He turned it toward me. My signature stared back at me from the bottom of the page, clear, familiar, mine. The hallway fell away. I remembered the evening, 2 nights ago, the couch, the movie playing softly in the background, Daniel handing me papers. Just administrative things, he'd said. Utilities registration, so I can take care of everything. I hadn't read them. I trusted him. The realization didn't hit like a blow. It seeped in slowly, filling every corner of me with something heavy and final. I had given him my home. With my own hand, Eleanor squeezed my arm again tighter this time. "Come with us," she said softly. "You need rest." Daniel held out his other hand. "Let's go home," he said. Home. The word echoed hollowly. Something inside me recoiled, not logically, not rationally, instinctively. The woman in the restaurant, her shaking fingers, her warning, she didn't survive. I tore my arm free. "Don't touch me!" I shouted. The neighbors gasped. Daniel's expression hardened for the first time. "Lydia," he said sharply, "stop this." I stepped back, my heel hitting the stair edge. For a moment, no one moved. Then I turned and ran. Down the stairs, past the first floor, out the door. Cold night air slammed into my lungs. I didn't stop running until the building was behind me, until the streetlights blurred through tears I hadn't realized were falling. I had no home, no money, and the man I had married stood upstairs, calmly explaining my disappearance, smiling, as if this erasure had always been part of the plan. Eleanor spoke softly, not loudly enough to command attention, not quietly enough to sound suspicious. Her voice had the tone doctors use when they believe the diagnosis is already decided, calm, reassuring, almost kind. "Lydia is exhausted," she said to the neighbors. "She's been under so much pressure lately." Pressure. The word floated in the narrow stairwell, gentle and poisonous at the same time. Daniel stood beside her, silent, now letting his mother lead. I noticed that how easily he stepped back, how naturally she took control. He only moved when she paused, as if their roles had been rehearsed. He opened the folder again. The paper made a dry official sound as it unfolded. Stamped, signed, final. My signature stared back at me. I didn't rush to deny it this time. I didn't scream or argue. I just looked. The letters were mine. The curve of the L. The slight upward tilt at the end of my last name, something my father had once teased me about. For a second, my mind refused to connect the dots. Then memory slid into place with cruel precision. The couch, the soft glow of the television. Daniel, sitting close, one arm draped casually behind me. "Just paperwork," he had said. I remembered how I hadn't wanted to interrupt the movie, how I trusted his tone, his timing, how I signed where he pointed without reading. Because that's what you do when you feel safe. The hallway seemed to shrink. I became aware of my breathing, too fast, too shallow. I tried to slow it down, to hold on to something solid, but there was nothing left to grip. "This isn't possible," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Daniel finally spoke. "It is," he said gently. "And it's done." I looked around at the neighbors. Mrs. Davis avoided my eyes. "Mr.?" Nelson frowned, thoughtful, as if weighing 2 versions of reality and choosing the one that made him most comfortable. They were already drifting away from me. I saw it happening in real time, the shift, the subtle recalibration, the way concern replaced certainty in their expressions. I wasn't a homeowner anymore. I was a problem, Lydia Eleanor said, stepping closer. You're upsetting yourself. Her hand rested on my forearm again. This time I didn't pull away immediately. I felt small, reduced, like a child being corrected in public. I never meant to sell, I said. You know that. She smiled with practiced sympathy. Intentions don't always align with actions, she replied. That's why adults rely on documentation. Adults. The word landed like a dismissal. Daniel exhaled slowly as if burdened by responsibility. We did this to protect you, he said. If creditors had gotten involved, there are no creditors, I snapped. He tilted his head slightly. That's what you think, he said. The certainty in his voice frightened me more than anger would have. I realized then that this conversation wasn't about convincing me. It was about convincing them. And it was working. Mrs. Davis cleared her throat. Maybe it's best if you rest, dear, she said kindly. You can talk things through later. Later. The word felt meaningless. I took a step backward. Eleanor tightened her grip. Come with us, she said again, no longer asking. I looked at Daniel. For a moment, just a moment, I searched his face for something familiar. Remorse, hesitation, even cruelty would have been easier to accept, but there was nothing, only resolve. That was when it happened. Not a thought, not a realization, a physical sensation. Something inside me gave way, not with pain, but with clarity. I understood with terrifying calm that if I went with them now, I might not come back. Not as myself. The woman from the restaurant came back to me then. Not her face, her voice. She didn't survive. I felt it echo in my chest, heavy and insistent. This wasn't about property. It was about control. I pulled my arm free with a force that surprised us all. Don't touch me, I said, my voice rising despite my effort to keep it steady. Eleanor's eyes hardened. Lydia, she warned. Daniel stepped forward. You're making this worse, he said quietly. I laughed. The sound startled everyone, including me. Worse than this, I asked. You took my home, my money, and now you're telling everyone I imagined it. That's not what we're saying, Daniel replied smoothly. It is, I said. That's exactly what you're saying. Silence fell, the kind that demands a conclusion. Eleanor glanced at the neighbors, then back at me. This isn't the place for this, she said. People are watching. I looked around. They were. And they had already decided who I was. I stepped back again, my heel catching on the stair edge. For a second I thought I might fall. No one moved to help. That hurt more than anything else. I turned. I didn't announce it. I didn't threaten or beg. I just turned and ran. Down the stairs, my hand scraping against the railing, my breath tearing at my chest. I didn't count the floors. I didn't look back. I heard Daniel shout my name once, not urgently, angrily. The night air hit me like a slap as I burst outside. I kept running, past the tree, past the corner, past the place where I used to stop to check my phone before going inside. I didn't stop until my legs burned and my lungs screamed. I bent over, hands on my knees, trying not to vomit. The city continued around me, indifferent. Cars passed. A couple laughed somewhere nearby. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't answer it. I knew who it would be. I straightened slowly. That was the moment I lost my home, not legally, emotionally, because something else had vanished with it, something I didn't know how to name yet. Trust, belonging, the assumption that truth would protect me. As I stood there shaking, I understood something else too, something colder, sharper. This was not an argument that could be won with reason. It was a story being written about me, and unless I found a way to take the pen back, I would disappear inside it. The old woman's words returned one last time, no longer a warning but a verdict. She didn't survive. And for the first time since that night began, I was truly afraid not of losing what I had already lost, but of becoming exactly who they were already telling the world I was. Her name was Margaret Hale. I said it out loud the first time she answered the phone, as if repeating it would anchor her to reality, as if names still carried weight in a world where mine had already begun to dissolve. "This is Lydia," I said. "From the flower shop." There was a pause, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she spoke. "I was wondering when you'd call," she said quietly. Her voice was steadier than I expected. Not warm, not cold, controlled. Like someone who had already used up all the tears she was allowed in this lifetime. We met the next morning, not at a cafe, not anywhere public or bright. She chose a small apartment on the edge of the city, a place that felt deliberately unremarkable. No photographs near the entrance, no flowers, nothing that invited questions. She opened the door and looked at me for a long moment before stepping aside. "You're alive," she said. It wasn't a greeting. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old books and something herbal. The curtains were half drawn, letting in a gray, filtered light that made time feel suspended. Margaret sat at the small kitchen table and motioned for me to do the same. She poured tea without asking, her hands steady, practiced. "You ran," she said. "That's why you're sitting here." I nodded. "If you hadn't," she added, "we wouldn't be having this conversation." She reached into a drawer and pulled out her phone. "I want you to see her," she said. She slid the phone across the table. The photo filled the screen. A young woman, mid-20s maybe, bright eyes, the kind of smile that doesn't know how to hide. She was holding a bouquet of flowers, orange gerberas. I recognized them instantly. "She loved those," Margaret said they looked honest. My throat tightened. "She came to your shop," I whispered. Margaret nodded. Every week, she swiped to another photo. Her daughter standing beside Daniel, his arm around her shoulders, his smile familiar, disarming, the same smile he had given me. "How long?" I asked. 3 months, Margaret replied. "From first date to wedding." My stomach clenched. After that, she continued, everything moved quickly. She said it without bitterness, without emphasis. Marriage, conversations about the future, how it would be easier if assets were consolidated, just for a while. Just to simplify things. I closed my eyes. I signed papers on the couch, I said. Margaret looked at me sharply. "During a movie?" she asked. I nodded, her lips pressed together. "Yes," she said, "that's his favorite time." She took a breath. "A month later, they went on a weekend trip," she said. "A lake." He said it was spontaneous, romantic. Her fingers tightened around her teacup. "There was an accident," she said. "That's what the report said." I didn't ask how. I didn't need to. "They found him," she continued, cold, shocked, grieving. Her voice didn't waver. "They found her 2 days later." Silence settled between us. Not the awkward kind, the heavy kind, the kind that doesn't ask to be filled. "They ruled it an accident," she said finally. "Everyone did." She looked up at me then. But I didn't. I leaned forward without realizing it. "What did you do?" I asked. Margaret's gaze held mine. "I stopped crying," she said. The words landed harder than any confession. "I cried for months," she continued. "I cried until people stopped expecting it, until they got uncomfortable, until they started telling me I needed to move on." Her fingers traced the rim of the cup absent-mindedly. And then she said, I started paying attention. To dates, to documents, to patterns. "I requested records," she said. "I asked questions that made people defensive." She gave a small, humorless smile. "That's when I learned something important," she said. "Daniel isn't clever." I frowned. "He's convincing," I said. "Yes," she replied, "but he's not careful." I felt something shift inside me. Then who I began. "Eleanor," Margaret said immediately. The name hung between us. "She's the architect," Margaret continued. "Daniel is the face." She stood and crossed the room, opening a cabinet. She pulled out a folder, thick, worn at the edges. She placed it on the table but didn't open it. Eleanor Sterling doesn't steal homes, she said. She erases ownership. I looked at her confused. She works in housing, Margaret explained. Records, registrations, archives. My pulse quickened. She knows how to make a document disappear, she said. Or appear. I thought of the contract in the hallway. The stamp, the certainty. They don't break in, Margaret said. They don't threaten. They don't force. She looked at me with something like pity. They convince you to hand everything over, she said. Then they rewrite reality. A chill crept up my spine. How many? I asked. Margaret hesitated. Enough, she said. She opened the folder. Inside were copies. Addresses, names, dates. I recognized none of them, but I recognized the pattern. Single homeowners, recently widowed or alone, assets transferred, deaths labeled accidental, disappearances explained away. I felt sick. They don't rush, Margaret said. They don't need to. She met my eyes again. You weren't special, she said gently. The words hurt more than I expected. You were chosen, she continued, because you fit. Independent, property owner. No immediate family to raise questions. You were next, she said. The room felt smaller. I thought of Eleanor's hand on my arm, the pressure, the certainty. She knew, I said. At the restaurant. Margaret nodded. She saw me. When weeks ago, Margaret said, she's been watching you. A wave of nausea rolled through me. And Daniel, I asked. He does what he's told, Margaret replied. He charms, he marries, he distracts. She paused. And if something goes wrong, she added, he disappears into the story she's already written. I leaned back in my chair, suddenly exhausted. Everything made sense now. The calm, the confidence, the speed. It wasn't passion, it was procedure. I tried to warn you, Margaret said softly. I didn't know if you'd listen. I thought of the money in my purse, the weight of it. You saved my life, I said. Margaret shook her head. No, she said. I delayed the ending. She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her skin was cool, steady. They won't stop, she said. Not now. I swallowed. What do they want? I asked. Margaret held my gaze. Everything, she said, including your silence. The truth settled into me slowly, painfully. I wasn't running from my husband anymore. I was running from a system, and systems don't get tired. They don't panic. They don't hesitate. They wait. I thought of my apartment, my shop, my name, gone, erased, rewritten. I looked at Margaret. What do we do? I asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at the photograph on the wall behind me, the one I hadn't noticed before. A framed picture of her daughter smiling alive. Her jaw tightened. We don't disappear, she said finally. The words didn't sound hopeful. They sounded defiant. And for the first time since the restaurant, I felt something other than fear settle into my chest. Not courage. Resolve. Because now I understood the truth in full, brutal clarity. This wasn't a tragedy waiting to happen. It was an operation already in motion, and unless someone stopped it, I wouldn't be the last name added to the list. We went at night because night forgives nothing. Daylight asks questions. Night only watches. The city office building looked different after midnight, emptied of voices, stripped of purpose. Its windows were dark except for a few floors where emergency lights glowed faintly like eyes refusing to close. Margaret walked beside me without speaking. She had changed since the afternoon, her movements quieter, more deliberate, as if grief had already rehearsed this moment long ago. We entered through a side door used by cleaning staff. The lock gave way with a sound so soft it felt intimate. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and old paper. Our footsteps echoed despite our care, each one a reminder that we didn't belong here. I kept thinking of Eleanor's office, how orderly it always was, How untouchable she seemed inside it. The elevator was too risky. We took the stairs. 3 flights. No talking. Only breath. My heart wasn't racing yet. That came later. For now, it was heavy, measured beating with the dull certainty that whatever we found would change me permanently. Eleanor Sterling's name was engraved on a brass plate beside the door. Deputy Director, Housing Authority. Margaret stopped. "This is it," she whispered. I nodded. The key she'd acquired slid into the lock smoothly. No resistance. That bothered me more than if it had fought us. Inside the office was immaculate, not tidy, curated. The desk surface was empty, except for a single pen aligned perfectly with a leather folder. Shelves of binders stood in flawless rows, no personal photographs, no evidence of sentiment. "This is how she thinks," Margaret murmured. "Everything in place, everything accounted for." We closed the door gently. The silence thickened. I moved toward the desk. The drawers were locked. Margaret checked the bookcase, law books, property codes, nothing out of place. Minutes passed. My chest tightened. "What if we're wrong?" I whispered. Margaret didn't answer. She walked to the wall behind the desk, the one covered in framed certificates and awards, civic commendations, photos with officials, proof of legitimacy. She studied them closely. Then she tapped the wall lightly with her knuckles. Once, twice. The second sound was different. Hollow. My breath caught. Margaret reached for the largest frame, a photograph of Eleanor shaking hands with the mayor. She lifted it carefully. Behind it was a small, square door embedded in the wall. A safe. For a moment, neither of us moved. There it was. The place where stories ended. "How?" I whispered. Margaret's lips pressed together. "She's sentimental," she said. "Just not in the way people expect." The dial was old-fashioned, manual, numbers worn smooth from use. Margaret glanced at the plaque beneath the awards. "Founded 1955, she read quietly. She turned the dial. 195. 5. A soft click. The door opened. Inside lay a single object, a ledger, gray, unlabeled, heavy. Margaret lifted it with both hands and set it on the desk. I felt something in me recoil. "Open it," she said. I didn't want to, but I did. The pages were neat, organized into columns: name, property, transfer date, status, notes, 8 entries, 8. I scanned the first. A man, widowed, condo sold, vanished. The second, a woman, single, studio apartment, accidental overdose. The third, Margaret's daughter. The word accident sat beside her name like a lie pretending to be small. Margaret made a sound, not a cry, not a scream, something quieter, more dangerous. I turned the pages faster. 4th, 5th, 6th, each one colder than the last. And then the final entry. Mine. My name. My parents' address. And under status, in progress. I stared at the words until my vision blurred. "I wasn't paranoid," I whispered. Margaret's hand found my shoulder. "No," she said. "You were scheduled." The room seemed to tilt. I thought of Eleanor's voice, Daniel's calm, the speed of it all. Procedure. "We need proof," Margaret said urgently. "We can't take the book." I nodded numbly. My phone. My hands shook as I pulled it out. I began photographing each page, carefully, methodically. I checked each image twice. Some were blurred. I retook them. Time slowed. Too much. My breath sounded loud in my ears. Halfway through, I heard footsteps, not the soft shuffle of cleaners, firm, male, approaching. Margaret froze. So soon, she whispered. The doorknob rattled. My blood turned to ice. The door opened. Daniel stood there. No smile. No mask. He wore dark clothes now, practical, anonymous. His eyes flicked to the desk, to the open safe, to the ledger. For a heartbeat he said nothing, then his face changed. Not anger, fury. "You shouldn't have done this," he said. The voice I had once trusted was gone. What remained was sharp, stripped of warmth. "You lied," I said. He laughed once harshly. "You didn't listen," he replied and lunged toward me. His hand closed around my wrist, twisting. Pain shot up my arm. My phone slipped from my fingers and hit the floor. Margaret moved instantly. She didn't scream. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed the glass carafe from the desk and swung it with both hands. The sound it made when it connected was dull. Final. Daniel staggered back, stunned. Margaret grabbed my arm. "Run," she said. I hesitated. Now. I snatched my phone and bolted. Behind me, I heard Daniel shout, "Security!" His voice echoed down the corridor. I ran blindly, following Margaret through the maze of hallways until we reached the stairwell. Footsteps thundered above us. "They're coming," I gasped. Margaret pushed me toward a small door beneath the stairs. "Inside," she ordered. It was a utility closet, narrow, dark. I stepped in confused. Margaret followed, then stopped. She turned me around and shoved me deeper inside. "No," I said suddenly, understanding. She met my eyes. "You have the proof," she said. "They'll focus on me." Her hand closed around the door handle. "Margaret, listen to me," she said softly. "Tomorrow, noon, Civic Center. Eleanor will be there." She smiled, not kindly but fiercely. "Show them," she said. "All of them." The door slammed shut. The lock clicked. I rushed forward, pounding on the door. "Open it," I whispered. "Please," footsteps thundered past. Voices. Daniel's. "Find her." I pressed my eye to the keyhole. I saw Margaret standing alone in the corridor, small but unyielding. Security guards reached her, grabbed her arms. She didn't resist. She turned her head slightly, just enough for me to see her face, and she nodded. I slid down the wall of the closet, clutching my phone to my chest. The darkness swallowed me. I didn't cry. I couldn't. Something harder had taken its place, because in that moment I understood the final truth. Margaret Hale didn't save me by running. She saved me by staying. And the life I had been trying to escape had just become a responsibility I could no longer refuse. The ceremony was packed, not crowded, packed. Every seat filled, every aisle monitored, every movement accounted for. The kind of event where applause was scheduled, not spontaneous. Where people clapped because it was time to clap. Politicians, journalists, cameras already humming, softly waiting. I stood at the back of the auditorium for a long moment before entering. My hands were steady, which surprised me. My body had already finished panicking sometime during the night on the cold floor of that utility closet. What remained wasn't bravery. It was inevitability. Margaret's words echoed in my head. "Tomorrow, noon. Show them." I stepped inside. The lights were bright but impersonal, not warm, not forgiving. Rows of red seats stretched forward like a corridor of judgment. On stage, a long table draped in white. Nameplates, microphones, water glasses untouched. And there she was. Eleanor Sterling, seated at the center, elegant, composed, dressed in pale gray, a color chosen carefully, not dominant, not vulnerable, respectable, untouchable. She smiled as people applauded her. The applause rolled through the room like a wave that expected obedience. I watched her hands still relaxed, folded neatly in her lap. Hands that signed papers, hands that erased lives without touching them. For a moment, doubt returned. Not fear. Something quieter. "No one will believe you." The thought came gently like an old friend. I walked anyway, down the center aisle. Each step felt loud in the hush between applause cycles. Heads turned, conversations faltered. I could feel the collective irritation. Who was interrupting? Who didn't know the rules? I didn't look at Eleanor. Not yet. I reached the front row before anyone stopped me. A security guard shifted in his seat. Another stood. Too slow. "Ma'am," one of them began. "Let her through." The voice came from the audience. A man stood halfway down the aisle. Mid-50s, work jacket, hands rough, clenched at his sides. "She has the right," he said. "That address she's holding," his voice broke. "That was my father's." Silence fell. Not polite silence, real silence, the kind that spreads. The guard hesitated. That was all I needed. I stepped forward and climbed the short steps onto the stage. The master of ceremonies backed away instinctively. The microphone stood waiting, indifferent. I picked it up. It was heavier than I expected. I turned to face the audience. My voice surprised me when it came clear, steady, unshaking. "My name is Lydia Sterling," I said. Then I corrected myself. "Lydia Hale." A murmur rippled through the room. "I married Daniel Sterling 2 weeks ago," I continued. "Yesterday I lost my home, my finances, and my legal identity." Eleanor leaned forward. Her smile did not reach her eyes. "This is inappropriate," she said into her microphone. "Security," I raised my hand. "I'm not finished." I opened the folder. The paper rustled softly. Loud enough. "I'm going to read names," I said. "If you recognize one, stand." I took a breath. The room seemed to inhale with me. James Calder, I read. 2-bedroom condominium on Ridgeway Avenue. Transferred after marriage. Status vanished. A man stood, slowly, as if testing gravity. "My uncle," he said. "He disappeared 3 years ago." The sound of his voice did something to the room. I read the next name. Angela Morris. Studio apartment on Hillcrest. Status accidental overdose. A woman gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. She stood. "My sister," she whispered. I didn't pause. I didn't let the room breathe. Daniel Reed. Townhouse on Pine Street. Status traffic collision. Another person stood. Then another. The room shifted from confusion to recognition. Addresses replaced abstractions. Names replaced numbers. Faces replaced statistics. I turned the page. My hands tightened around the paper. "Vera Hale," I said. The sound of the name felt like breaking glass. The doors at the back of the auditorium opened. Margaret's nephew stepped inside, holding a large, framed photograph. Vera's face filled the room, bright eyes, trusting smile. A collective sound moved through the audience, not applause, not outrage, grief. "That sound doesn't need translation." "That's my daughter Margaret's nephew," said hoarsely, "and my aunt was arrested last night trying to protect this woman." He pointed at me. "She's the reason Vera isn't forgotten." Chaos erupted. People stood. Voices overlapped. "That was my neighbor. We bought that apartment. They said it was legal." Journalists surged forward, cameras swinging wildly, no longer aimed at the stage but at the truth unraveling in real time. I finally looked at Eleanor. For the first time she looked small, not physically, strategically. Her eyes darted not in fear but calculation, searching for control points, allies, exits. They were gone. She stood abruptly. "This is a fabrication," she said sharply. "These documents are certified by your office," I replied calmly. I lifted the phone and photographed inside your safe. The mayor shifted uncomfortably beside her. The applause had not returned. It wouldn't. The chief of police stood, quietly, authoritatively. He said something into his radio. Eleanor's composure fractured, not shattered but cracked. Her voice rose. "You don't understand who I am." The words landed flat. No one answered. Daniel appeared in the aisle face, pale bandage visible beneath his hairline. "She's lying," he shouted. "She's unstable." No one turned toward him. That was the final humiliation. Being unheard, I lowered the microphone. My hands were trembling now, not with fear, but release. I had done what Margaret asked. I stepped back. Police moved onto the stage. Eleanor resisted, not violently, but verbally. Connections, titles, warnings. None of it mattered anymore. When the cuffs closed around her wrists, the sound was barely audible, but it echoed. Daniel was taken next. He looked at me once. There was no anger in his eyes, only disbelief, as if the story had betrayed him. The auditorium buzzed with voices, but I felt distant from it all, as if sound had been turned down. I stepped off the stage and leaned against the wall. My legs finally gave way. Someone offered me water. I declined. I didn't need comfort. I needed confirmation. Margaret's nephew approached me. "Thank you," he said simply. I nodded. There were no words left. As the room slowly emptied, people lingering, talking, reassessing their memories, I stood there breathing, feeling something unfamiliar settle into my chest. Not victory, closure. For the first time since the restaurant, I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't erased. Eleanor Sterling, who had once filled rooms with authority, was escorted out quietly, her head held high, out of habit, not strength. And as the doors closed behind her, one final thought settled over me, calm and undeniable. Power survives in silence, and today silence had refused to cooperate. They were arrested publicly, not dragged, not humiliated, just escorted quietly, furious, impeccably dressed, suddenly irrelevant. Eleanor walked with her spine straight, as if posture alone could still command the room. Daniel followed a step behind, no longer leading, no longer protected. For a moment, just a moment, he looked like a man realizing that charm has an expiration date. Power does that. It leaves without saying goodbye. I didn't watch them for long. I had already spent enough of my life looking at their faces, trying to understand them. When the doors closed behind the officers, something inside me closed as well, not tightly, not violently, gently, like a book that knows its last page has been reached. Margaret was released that same evening. She didn't smile when she saw me. She didn't cry. She only reached for my hands and held them for a long time, as if checking that we were both still real. "They won't get everything back," she said quietly, "but they won't do this again. It wasn't justice, but it was interruption. Sometimes that's the best the world can offer." My apartment was returned within the week. The paperwork came first, thick envelopes, official language apologies written by people who never meant them. Then the keys, familiar weight, familiar shape. The door opened with a sound I hadn't realized I'd missed. Inside, the air smelled wrong at first. Чужое. Чуждое. Someone else's cooking, someone else's detergent. Evidence of a life briefly laid over mine and then peeled away. I opened the windows, wide. I let the city rush back in, traffic voices, whined the unfiltered noise of people living without permission. I stood in the middle of the room and breathed until the space began to feel like mine again. That night I slept on the floor, not because I had to, because I wanted to. I needed to feel the ground beneath me, solid and unnegotiable. My accounts were unfrozen slowly, cautiously, like an apology that didn't trust itself yet. My name returned to registries. My signature stopped meaning surrender and started meaning consent again. People asked me how it felt. I never knew how to answer. Relief isn't loud. Recovery isn't cinematic. Most days it felt like silence, learning how to be safe again. Margaret visited often. We didn't talk about Vera unless one of us needed to. Grief doesn't like being scheduled. Sometimes we sat at the kitchen table without speaking, letting the quiet do its work. She kept the photograph on the wall. So did I. Life resumed in fragments. I returned to the flower shop, touched stems, trimmed leaves. Let my hands remember who they were before they signed papers without reading. Flowers don't lie. They wilt when neglected. They bloom when cared for. I trusted that. At night I still woke, sometimes heart racing, certain I'd heard a key in the lock. Certain a voice would say my name the way Daniel used to say it, gently, possessively, as if it belonged to him. But the door stayed closed. And then one morning I realized I hadn't thought of him in days. That was when I understood what survival actually looks like. Not vengeance. Not triumph. Absence. Here is the truth adults understand too late. Evil doesn't always shout. It doesn't always threaten or bruise or break things loudly enough to be noticed. Sometimes it smiles across a dinner table. Sometimes it remembers your favorite flowers. Sometimes it listens, really listens, until you believe that attention is the same as care. Sometimes it marries you. Sometimes it asks you to sign without reading. And it never rushes. It waits until you are tired, until you are lonely, until you are relieved to let someone else take responsibility. That's when it moves. I think often about the version of myself who sat on that couch, movie playing, pen in hand, trusting the warmth beside her. I don't judge her. She wasn't weak. She was human. And humans want to believe that love protects them from systems designed to consume quietly. What saved me wasn't strength. It was interruption. A woman who stopped crying long enough to pay attention. A moment when silence broke instead of protecting power. A room full of people who stood up at the right time. Courage doesn't arrive fully formed. Sometimes it's just refusing to sit down when everyone expects you to. I keep copies of the documents now. I read everything, slowly, not because I live in fear, but because awareness is the opposite of erasure. My life is mine again, not because it was returned, but because I reclaimed it piece by piece, breath by breath, without asking permission. And if you're listening to this, if something in it feels familiar, let me leave you with this. Pay attention to the quiet moments, to the signatures, to the stories that feel too clean. Because the most dangerous traps don't look like cages, they look like comfort. And the moment you realize that is the moment you can still walk away. Before we say goodbye, let me speak to you not as a storyteller, but as a fellow adult who has lived long enough to know that life rarely breaks us loudly. It breaks us quietly. It happens in moments we don't question, in signatures we don't read, in people we trust because they sound reasonable, calm, loving. We are taught to watch out for danger that shouts. But no one warns us about danger that smiles. About the kind that sits beside us on the couch. That calls us my love. That offers to take care of things so we can finally rest, and by the time we realize what we've given away, we're told it was our choice. This story is not about villains and heroes, it's about awareness, about understanding that adulthood is not immunity. Intelligence is not protection, and love, real love, never requires you to disappear. If this story made you uncomfortable, that's not a failure of the story. That's recognition. Because somewhere in all of us is a moment we ignored, a quiet warning, a feeling we explained away, a voice we chose not to hear. And yet here is the hopeful truth. As long as you can still recognize yourself, as long as you can still say this doesn't feel right, it is not too late. Power survives in silence. But it collapses the moment someone speaks clearly. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. Thank you for listening slowly, thoughtfully. If this story resonated with you, I invite you to reflect, not react. And if you feel comfortable, share your thoughts in the comments. This is a space for adults who think deeply, feel honestly, and refuse to disappear quietly. Until the next story, take care of yourself and read before you sign. Good night wherever you're listening from.